In this video, we'll cover three topics: cumulative frequency distributions, percentiles and quartiles, and cross-tabulations. These all build on the frequency distributions we learned in the previous video. The cumulative relative frequency answers the question, what proportion of observations fall at or below a certain value? And we build it by adding up the relative frequencies as we move from smallest to largest group. For relative frequencies, first you need to find out the total number of observations in your sample, which is again 94. Then we find the relative frequency by dividing your raw frequency by your number of observation, which needs to stay constant for all our relative frequency calculations. So again, we'll fix that, and then we'll apply the equation to the rest. So we have the relative frequencies, and based on that, now we can find our cumulative relative frequencies. So first, for the first bin, we're just taking the relative frequency. And then for the second group, we're adding the relative frequency to our previous cumulative relative frequency. For the third bin, we're still doing the same thing, where we're adding that group's relative frequency to the cumulative relative frequency so far. And then in the end, you see that it all sums up to 1. In the line chart of the cumulative distribution on the right is really a practical business tool because you can read directly from it what percentage of orders cost less than 52,000. Then you just find 52,000 on the x-axis, trace it up to the line, and then to the left of the y-axis. That percentage is your answer instantly. A percentile tells you where a value stands relative to the whole data set. The 90th percentile is a value at or below which at least 90% of observations fall. You're already familiar with this from standardized tests. Scoring in the 90th percentile means you did as well or better than 90% of test takers. Now, to compute this manually, you sort the data smallest to largest, and then calculate the rank using this formula. N times k divided by 100 plus 0.5, then round to the nearest whole number. And then you find the value at that rank in the sorted list. Here, n is the total number of your observations, and k is the percentile that you want to find. So, for example, if we want to find the 90th percentile for cost per order in the purchase orders data, then we'll be using this equation. And looks like there is a typo in the slides. So again, in this particular purchase orders data, we have 94 observations. And out of the 94 observations, we want to find the 90th percentile. So our n is 94, k is 90. And so we plug it into our equation, and that gives us 85.1, which we will round to 85. Then you just find the value of the 85th observation, which is $74,375. Now in Excel, you can use the function percentile.inc, but this will give you $73,737.50 for the same dataset purchase orders and using cost per order. Now, they are different in terms of the values that they give compared to the manual formula, but both are correct. They just use different interpolation methods. The Excel rank and percentile tool from example 4.11 matches the manual formula. And neither is wrong, just be consistent within an analysis. Let's try using Excel to compute the percentiles. So first we can try computing the manual rank. If we want to figure out the 90th percentile of cost per order manually, then you would just need to use the formula. We'll type in 94, which is our N, times 90, which is our K, the percentile, divided by 100, and then plus 0.5, which gives us 85.1. Now we can round this to a whole number by using the round function. We don't want any decimals. So that gives us 85, which is the rank of the 90th percentile. Now we want to find the 85th value in the data. So here, what we're going to do is we're going to use the function large. This is going to give us sort the data from the largest to smallest. So the data set that we're interested in is for the cost per order. And because this is for largest to smallest, we use 94 minus 85 plus 1. This returns the 85th smallest value, which equals 94 minus 85 plus 1, which is the 10th largest. And that's what happens when you want to use the function large. Now you could also sort the order from smallest to largest and then manually find row 85. Now a better approach would be to use the function small, which sorts the data from small to large. Again, the data that we want to sort through is our cost per order. And then we want to find the 85th smallest value, again, which is going to give us the same result, $74,375. Now let's try computing using our percentile function. Again, our array is the same as before, from G4 to G97. Our K is 90th or 0.9, and the result is 73,737.5. Now you can see that these values actually look slightly different depending on whether you use manual calculation versus you use your percentile function. Again, this is slightly different because they use different interpolation methods, but both are correct. Now let's try running the rank and percentile tool. So we're going to click anywhere in the data, go to the Data tab, then go to Data Analysis. We're going to select rank and percentile. Now we're going to set the input range, which is our cost per order. I'm going to include the header and then click labels in first row. I'm going to select new worksheet. Now in the output, we see that the cost per order has been ranked from highest to lowest. And we also know where in the data, which row this cost appears. And here, looking at the output, find the row where the percent is closest to 90. And here we see that the value 74,375 has the percent being 90.3, which is the closest to 90%. Again, we can see that this actually matches the manual formula result. Now let's move on to quartiles. Quartiles break the data into 4 parts. The 25th percentile is called the first quartile, Q1. The 50th percentile is called the second quartile, Q2, and so on and so forth. So Q3 would be the 75th percentile and Q4 would be the maximum. So pretty much you're splitting your data into 1/4. Now Excel function quartile.inc would give you the quartiles for the data that you select. Array is referring to the range of data that you want to split, and quart is the whole number between 1 through 4, depending on which quartile you want to find. A cross-tabulation, also called a contingency table, is a two-dimensional frequency distribution. So here, instead of counting for one variable, we're simultaneously counting for two categorical variables and showing how they relate to each other. So for example, here we're counting two different variables, books and DVDs that are sold by region. Now, the raw count table tells us West has the most total transactions and book outsells DVDs everywhere. Now, if you look at the raw data, we can see that the West region has the most total transactions, and comparing the numbers between books and DVDs, we can see that books outsell DVDs everywhere. But if you look at the percentage table, where each row sums to 100%, this reveals that information much more quickly. Now let's try using the sales transactions data to build a cross-tabulation of region by product using a pivot table. So we're going to click anywhere inside the sales transactions data range. We're going to click Insert, and in the Tables group, we're going to click Pivot Table. In the Create Pivot Table dialog, confirm that the table range is correct. We're going to select New Worksheet and click OK. Now in the Pivot Table Fields pane, we're going to drag region to the rows area. Then we're going to drag product to the columns area. Then we're going to drag any field that we want, such as customer ID, to the values area. Now that we have customer ID in the values, you can see that right now it's defaulted to sum of customer IDs. Now going to field settings, we don't want the sum of customer IDs, but we actually want a count of customer IDs. So we'll select count. And then this gives us a quick view of how many books and DVDs were sold at each of the regions. To show row percentages, we can click on any value cell inside the pivot table. And in the pivot table fields pane, click on the I next to the count of customer ID. And then under show data as, we're going to select the percentage of row total. Now we can see that out of each of the regions, what percentage of the sales were books versus DVDs. Now that we have our pivot table, we can select the data that we want, books and DVDs for all of each regions, and then we can insert a cluster column chart, and this will show us graphically what percentage of books versus DVDs were sold in each of the regions visually.